I still hear the sound in my head, a loud bang, sharp, sudden, echoing through a quiet suburban street that was supposed to be safe. My 5-year-old was standing just a few feet away, frozen, confused, and the person holding the gun? Not a criminal, not a stranger. It was the HOA president, in broad daylight, over a petty argument. Neighbors screamed. Someone dropped to the ground. My child started crying before I even realized what had happened. Within minutes, not hours, minutes, police cars flooded the street. Sirens, rifles, SWAT teams pointing weapons at a house we all thought was respectable. That moment shattered every illusion I had about safety, power, and control in America's so-called perfect neighborhoods. What happened next exposed a side of HOAs nobody warns you about, and nearly changed my family's life forever. Stay with me. This story takes turns you won't expect. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this video from right now? Is it New York? Texas? California? Florida? Backhand index pointing down, drop your city's name in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, this channel is where we tell real, raw, emotional stories that expose the truth behind everyday life in America, stories that most people are too afraid to talk about. So before the story begins, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear is something every parent, every homeowner, and every neighbor needs to understand. Now, let me take you back. This wasn't some high-crime area. This wasn't a rough neighborhood. This was one of those places real estate agents describe as quiet, family-friendly, and perfectly managed. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, kids riding bikes, American flags on porches, and right at the center of it all, the HOA. They promised order. They promised safety. They promised community. But what they really had was unchecked power. I never imagined that a simple disagreement would turn into a moment where my child's life flashed before my eyes. I never imagined that the person enforcing parking rules and grass height would one day fire a gun near my 5-year-old. And I definitely never imagined that SWAT would arrive in minutes, turning our peaceful block into a war zone. This story isn't just about one angry neighbor. It's about control, fear, and how fast things can spiral. So take a breath, because now the real story begins. The morning started like any other normal day. The kind of day you never expect to remember for the rest of your life. The sun was out, not too hot, not too cold. Birds were chirping, lawns were freshly watered. The neighborhood looked like something straight out of a real estate brochure. Safe, calm, predictable. My 5-year-old was outside with me, holding a small plastic toy truck, dragging it along the sidewalk, making engine sounds under his breath. I remember smiling, thinking how lucky we were to live somewhere like this. No crime, no chaos, just families, routines, and rules. Lots of rules. Rules enforced by the HOA. At the time, I didn't hate the HOA. I didn't love them either. They were just there. Sending emails about trash cans being visible, lawns being half an inch too tall, cars parked incorrectly. Annoying? Yes. Dangerous? Never crossed my mind. Until that morning. I noticed her car first. The HOA president's SUV came to a sudden stop near my driveway, aggressive, like she wanted attention. She stepped out fast, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, jaw clenched. The kind of posture that already tells you this isn't going to be a friendly conversation. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how my day was. She pointed. Your trash cans were out past the allowed time yesterday, she said sharply. No greeting. No warmth. I calmly replied that I had brought them in as soon as I got home from work and that the rules allowed until evening. I wasn't raising my voice. My child was right there. I was trying to stay respectful. But something about that response flipped a switch in her. Her face tightened. Her tone changed. I run this neighborhood, she snapped. Don't argue with me. That sentence hit harder than I expected. I run this neighborhood. I looked around. Other neighbors had started slowing down. Curtains moved. People were watching. My child stepped closer to my leg, sensing the tension even if he didn't understand it. I tried to end it. I don't want problems, I said. We can talk about it later. That's when she laughed. A cold, mocking laugh. You people always say that, she replied. That's when I knew. This wasn't about trash cans. This was about power. She stepped closer. Too close. My child was now directly beside me, his tiny fingers gripping my jeans. I gently moved him behind me, instinctively shielding him. And then she said something I will never forget. You don't belong here if you can't follow rules. My heart started racing. Not from fear, from disbelief. Who talks like that? In front of a child? I told her to leave my property. That's when everything spiraled. Her hand moved toward her waistband. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not over this. But then the metal caught the sunlight. A gun. My body went cold. She pulled it out halfway, not fully aiming, not fully hiding it either. Just enough to send a message. And then bang. The sound was deafening. A single shot fired into the ground nearby. The world stopped. My child screamed. A scream no parent ever wants to hear. Pure terror, confusion, pain, without understanding why. Neighbors shouted. Someone yelled, "Call 911." A woman across the street dropped to her knees. Dogs barked wildly. Car alarms started going off. I grabbed my child, lifting him off the ground, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. My hands were shaking. I couldn't tell if I was yelling or praying or both. She stood there, frozen, like she couldn't believe what she had just done either. Then reality hit her. She ran, back into her house. Door slammed, and suddenly sirens. Not one, not two, many. Within minutes, the entire street was flooded with police cars, lights flashing red and blue against the quiet homes, officers shouting commands, neighbors ordered back inside, weapons drawn. Then came the armored vehicles. SWAT. I held my child tightly as officers positioned themselves, aiming rifles at the HOA president's house, the same house where neighborhood meetings used to happen, the same living room where people once discussed flower pots and mailbox colors. Now it was a crime scene. My child buried his face into my chest, shaking. "Daddy, why was there a loud noise?" he asked through tears. I didn't have an answer. I just kept whispering, "You're safe. You're safe. I've got you." But inside, I wasn't sure anymore. Because if this could happen here in a place with rules, order, and authority, what safe even meant had completely changed. And this was only the beginning. Once the police secured the area, the street didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a movie set frozen mid-scene, yellow tape stretching across driveways, officers speaking into radios, neighbors standing in small silent clusters, eyes wide, voices low. I sat on the curb with my child wrapped in my arms. An officer crouched in front of us, speaking gently, asking if my child was hurt. Physically, he was fine. Emotionally, I could already tell something had changed. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. That's when I started hearing whispers, not from the police, from the neighbors. At first, they spoke carefully, like they were afraid the words themselves might get them in trouble. "She's always been intense," one man said, glancing over his shoulder. Another woman leaned closer and whispered, "This isn't the first time she's threatened someone." That made my stomach drop. Threatened someone? As more people gathered, the stories started spilling out, like a dam finally breaking after years of pressure. One neighbor said she'd been fined repeatedly for unauthorized holiday decorations, even though others had the same ones. Another claimed the HOA president once showed up at their door at 9 p.m., screaming about a car parked slightly over the line. A retired couple mentioned she tried to force her way into their backyard to inspect a shed. And then someone said the words that chilled me. "She carries the gun everywhere." I looked up sharply. "What?" The neighbor nodded. "She's mentioned it before. Said it was for protection." Protection from what? Lawns? Trash cans? Families? The police began going door to door, taking statements. When they reached us, I told them everything, every word, every movement, every second leading up to the shot. My voice cracked when I described my child's scream. One of the officers looked away, jaw tight. They told me something I wasn't expecting. Multiple 911 911 calls had come in within seconds of the gunshot. Not just from our street, but from nearby blocks too. People were terrified. Reports said an armed HOA official was firing a weapon in a residential area near a child. That's why SWAT came so fast. They weren't taking chances. As the standoff continued, the HOA president refused to come out. Hours passed. Negotiators spoke through megaphones. Drones hovered above. The same woman who once lectured neighbors about lawn length was now barricaded inside her home. And the longer it went on, the more ugly truth surfaced. A police sergeant quietly told another officer, loud enough for me to overhear, that she had a prior incident on record. Not criminal, but concerning. A complaint filed years ago. Another neighbor had reported feeling threatened during an HOA dispute. Nothing came of it back then, because no one had been physically hurt. Yet, that word echoed in my head. Yet, I realized something terrifying in that moment. We had all been living beside a ticking time bomb. People started blaming themselves. I should have reported her. I thought I was overreacting. She always said she knew people in power. That last line stuck with me. She knew people in power. That's when I understood why so many neighbors stayed silent for so long. The HOA controlled fines, violations, legal pressure. Speaking up felt risky. Challenging her felt dangerous, even before the gun. Control doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like fear disguised as authority. Eventually, she came out, hands up, shaking, crying. The gun was recovered. She was arrested. As officers placed her into the back of a squad car, our eyes met for just a second. There was no apology, no remorse, just anger, like we had ruined her life. That look haunted me, because it wasn't the look of someone who lost control. It was the look of someone who felt entitled. The police assured us she would be charged. Discharging a firearm in a residential area, child endangerment, aggravated assault. The words sounded heavy, but I'd already learned that words don't always lead to justice. Later that night, after the police left and the street slowly returned to silence, I tucked my child into bed. He clutched his stuffed toy tighter than usual. "Daddy," he whispered, "is she coming back?" That question broke me. I promised him she wouldn't. I promised we were safe. But deep down, another fear took root. What if she wasn't the only one like this? What if the system that gave her power protected her too? Because the next morning, something happened that none of us expected, something that proved this nightmare was far from over. I thought the worst was over once she was taken away in handcuffs. I was wrong. The next morning, our neighborhood looked normal again, too normal. The police tape was gone. The street was quiet. Birds chirped like nothing had happened. But inside our home, everything felt different. My child woke up screaming from a nightmare, crying about the loud bang. He refused to step outside. That's when my phone buzzed. An email from the HOA. No sympathy, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a subject line that made my blood boil. Notice of community standards violation. I opened it, thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. The email claimed I had behaved in a disruptive manner, escalated a verbal disagreement, and created an unsafe environment within the community. I stared at the screen, stunned. Unsafe? My child almost got shot. But according to them, I was the problem. The message went on to warn me about potential fines, legal action, and further consequences if similar behavior occurred again. I felt sick. I called the HOA management company immediately. After being put on hold for almost 20 minutes, a calm, emotionless voice finally answered. I explained everything: the gun, the police, SWAT, my child. There was a pause. Then she said something I'll never forget. We understand this was an unfortunate situation, but the HOA must remain neutral. Neutral. A gun was fired near a 5-year-old, and they were neutral. I asked how they could possibly send a violation notice after something like that. Her response was cold. The board has concerns about liability and public perception. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about justice. This was about protecting the HOA. Later that day, Neighbors started messaging me quietly. Private texts, whispered phone calls. Did you get the email? They sent one to me too. They're telling us not to talk to the media. The HOA had gone into damage control mode. An emergency board meeting was announced. Closed door, residents not allowed to attend. No agenda listed. No transparency. Fear spread fast. Some neighbors stopped making eye contact. Others apologized nervously, saying they didn't want trouble. One family told me they were thinking of selling their house. Selling. Because of the HOA. Then the letters came, certified mail, from the HOA's attorney. They accused me of defamation, warning that speaking publicly about the incident could result in legal consequences. They referenced unverified claims and reputational harm. Unverified? There were police reports, witnesses, body cam footage, but still they tried to silence me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. I replayed the gunshot over and over. I worried about my child's trauma. I worried about retaliation. I worried about losing our home, not to violence, but to paperwork and pressure. That's when I realized something terrifying. This system was designed to protect itself, not the people living in it. The HOA president was suspended, not removed. Her name was never mentioned in official communications. The board released a vague statement calling it a personal matter unrelated to HOA duties. A personal matter involving a firearm during HOA enforcement. Neighbors were furious, but quietly. People were afraid to speak openly. Some had already been fined in the past. Others relied on HOA approval for renovations or permits. Power has a way of keeping people obedient. I decided I couldn't stay silent. I contacted a lawyer. The first one hesitated. HOA cases are messy, powerful, expensive. The second one listened carefully and then sighed. You're not the first, he said, and unfortunately, you won't be the last. He explained how HOAs often operate like mini-governments with rules, enforcement, and legal muscle, but far less oversight. When things go wrong, they circle the wagons. He warned me. If I fought back, it wouldn't be quick or easy. But then he looked at my child, sitting quietly in the corner, clutching his toy. If this happened near my kid, he said, I'd fight too. That gave me strength. I started documenting everything. Emails, letters, witness statements, screenshots, dates, times. And then something unexpected happened. A neighbor knocked on my door late one evening. She was shaking. I have something you need to see, she whispered. What she showed me changed everything and proved that this incident wasn't a one-time loss of control. It was part of a much darker pattern. The neighbor who stood at my door that night looked terrified, not dramatic, not emotional, but genuinely scared. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if someone might be watching. I shouldn't even be here, she whispered. If they find out I showed you this, I don't know what they'll do. She pulled a thick envelope from her bag and placed it on my kitchen table. Inside were copies of documents, old ones, some printed, some scanned, some handwritten notes. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the dates. They went back years. HOA complaint logs, internal emails, incident reports, all tied to the same name, the HOA president. My hands started shaking as I flipped through the pages. There were formal complaints from residents describing intimidation, threats, harassment. People wrote about her showing up unannounced at their homes, screaming in driveways, blocking cars with her SUV, threatening fines that didn't exist in the bylaws. One complaint stopped me cold. A resident claimed she once said, "People like you should be careful. Accidents happen." Another described her placing a hand near her waistband during an argument years ago. The gun wasn't new. It had always been there. What shocked me even more was what happened after these complaints were filed. Nothing. No investigations. No disciplinary action. No warnings. Instead, the HOA board dismissed them as personal disputes or miscommunications. In one email, a board member even wrote, "She's passionate. That's why we put her in charge." Passionate. I felt sick. The neighbor explained how she got the documents. She used to volunteer for the HOA, helped with filing, emails, meeting notes. She said she'd always felt uneasy about how complaints disappeared or were quietly buried. When the shooting happened, she said, voice breaking, I realized if I stayed silent, I'd be part of it. I thanked her, but fear gnawed at me. These documents weren't just proof. They were dangerous. The next day, I showed everything to my lawyer. He went silent as he read. Then he looked up slowly. This, he said, tapping the stack of papers, changes everything. He explained that the HOA wasn't just negligent, it could be liable. They had prior knowledge, a documented pattern, and they still allowed her to remain in power, armed, and acting as an enforcer. That's when he said something that sent chills down my spine. If that bullet had gone a few inches the other way, this would be a very different case. I thought of my child. I couldn't breathe. We decided to move forward, carefully, strategically. No emotional outbursts, just facts. But the HOA sensed something. Before we could make anything public, they struck first. Another letter arrived. This time it was aggressive. They demanded we cease all unauthorized sharing of internal HOA materials. They accused us of theft, breach of confidentiality, and intent to harm the community. They didn't deny the documents. They just wanted them buried. Then came the phone calls. Unknown numbers. Silent voicemails. Hang-ups when I answered. One night, I noticed a car parked across the street, engine running, lights off. It stayed there for nearly an hour. Maybe coincidence. But fear doesn't care about logic. Neighbors began distancing themselves again. Some stopped responding entirely. One person quietly asked me to delete their messages. I have kids, they said. I can't risk it. I understood. That was the most heartbreaking part, realizing how fear isolates people. How systems survive not because everyone agrees with them, but because speaking up feels too dangerous. Then something unexpected happened. A local reporter reached out. Word had leaked, not from us, but from someone inside the HOA. The reporter had questions, real ones, about prior complaints, about the gun, about the HOA's response. For the first time since the shooting, I felt a flicker of hope. Sunlight, but hope has consequences. Within hours of the reporter's call, the HOA sent out a community-wide email accusing certain individuals of spreading misinformation and threatening the stability and property values of the neighborhood. Property values. That mattered more than a child's life. The email urged residents to stand united and warned that outside interference could bring negative attention. The message was clear. Choose sides. And suddenly we weren't just victims. We were targets. That night, my child asked me something that shattered my heart. Daddy, are we bad people? I held him tightly and said no, over and over. But inside, I realized the truth. Doing the right thing doesn't always make you feel safe. Sometimes it makes you feel hunted. Because the next step the HOA took, the one meant to scare us into silence, crossed a line none of us were prepared for. The lawsuit threat didn't come quietly. It arrived like a warning shot, deliberate, calculated, meant to intimidate. A thick envelope was taped to our front door one morning. Not mailed, not discreet, placed there for anyone passing by to see. Inside was a formal notice of intent to pursue legal action from the HOA's legal team. They accused us of defamation, emotional distress to board members, breach of HOA confidentiality, interference with community harmony. Community harmony. I laughed when I read that part. Then I cried. They weren't denying the gunshot. They weren't denying the arrest. They weren't denying the past complaints. They were blaming us for talking. The letter demanded we retract any statements, stop cooperating with media, and agree to mediation on their terms. If we didn't comply, they threatened a full civil lawsuit that could result in substantial financial consequences. In plain language, shut up or we'll bury you in legal fees. My lawyer wasn't surprised. This is a pressure tactic, he said. They're counting on fear, on exhaustion. And fear, it worked. For a while, I started noticing changes everywhere. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid us. HOA notices piled up, parking violations, landscaping warnings, noise complaints that made no sense. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every letter made my chest tighten. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Every time my child flinched at a loud sound, guilt crushed me. Was I doing the right thing? One night, after putting my child to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the lawsuit notice. My hands were shaking. I imagined losing the house, losing savings, losing stability. And then my child came out of his room. He couldn't sleep. "I'm scared," he said quietly. I pulled him into my lap. He rested his head on my chest, listening to my heartbeat. That's when he said something that changed everything. "Daddy, you didn't do anything wrong, right?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "We didn't." "Then why are they mad at us?" I didn't have a good answer. Because how do you explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes telling the truth makes powerful people angry? That night, my partner and I had the hardest conversation of our lives. Do we fight, or do we walk away? Selling the house would be easier, quieter, safer. Plenty of families had done it before us. We could disappear and start over somewhere else. But walking away meant letting them win. It meant sending a message that fear works, that silence is the price of safety. The next morning, the reporter's story aired, and everything exploded. The headline was everywhere. Body cam footage surfaced. Witness interviews played back to back. Experts questioned how an HOA allowed an armed individual with prior complaints to remain in power. Public outrage grew fast, and suddenly the HOA's tone changed. They issued a public statement expressing deep concern and regret. They announced the HOA president had officially resigned. Not fired, resigned. No apology to us. No accountability. But it wasn't enough anymore. More neighbors came forward. Not privately, publicly. One after another. Stories poured out. People shared screenshots, videos, old emails. Former board members admitted complaints were ignored. A former property manager confirmed pressure from the board to keep things quiet. The dam broke. The HOA withdrew their lawsuit threat within 48 hours. Quietly. No explanation. No apology. But the damage was done. My child started therapy. I stopped sleeping normally. The neighborhood never felt the same again. Even though we won, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Months later, we made our decision. We sold the house, not because we lost, but because staying meant reliving the trauma every single day. On our last night there, I stood outside and looked down the street where it all happened. Same sidewalks, same houses, same illusion of safety. Different truth, because now I knew something most people don't learn until it's too late. Power without accountability is dangerous, no matter how clean the lawns look. And just when I thought this chapter was closed, one final revelation surfaced, something that proved this story mattered far beyond our street. We thought leaving would bring peace. In some ways, it did. A new city, a new street, no HOA emails, no clipboards, no fear of someone knocking on our door with authority in their voice. But trauma doesn't respect moving trucks or fresh paint. For months after we left, my child still flinched at loud noises. Fireworks meant tears. Balloons popping meant panic. Therapy helped, slowly, but the scars of that single moment, that one gunshot, didn't disappear overnight. Neither did the truth, because once the story went public, it didn't stay local. Emails started pouring in from all over the country. Arizona, Florida, Texas, California, New York, different cities, different neighborhoods, same pattern. HOA leaders abusing power, threats disguised as enforcement, complaints ignored, residents silenced through fines and legal pressure. Some stories were worse than ours. One parent wrote about an HOA board member threatening to call child services over sidewalk chalk. Another described a veteran being harassed for flying the wrong flag. One message came from a woman who said her HOA president bragged about carrying a gun too. That one made my blood run cold. What happened to us wasn't rare. It was just exposed. A few weeks after we moved, I got a call from the reporter. "You should know this," she said. After public pressure and an internal review, the HOA management company had been replaced. The board was forced to release complaint records to residents. New rules were drafted limiting enforcement authority. Mandatory background checks were introduced. It didn't erase what happened, but it created consequences. The former HOA president? She faced criminal charges, a plea deal, probation, mandatory counseling, a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Still not justice enough, but accountability at last. The neighborhood changed too. Residents started attending meetings. People asked questions. Silence was replaced with scrutiny. That's how systems change, not through comfort, but through discomfort. One evening, months later, my child asked me something unexpected. "Daddy, did we help people?" I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said. "I think we did." He smiled. That moment made every sleepless night worth it. Here's the truth I need you to hear, especially if you live in an HOA community. Read your bylaws. Document everything. Never assume it can't happen here. And never stay silent when power crosses the line. Authority does not equal morality. Rules do not excuse abuse. And safety should never depend on fear. If you're watching this and thinking, "This sounds like my neighborhood," trust that instinct. Talk to your neighbors. Ask questions. Protect each other. And if you're a parent, your child is more important than any rule book. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something important. Backhand index pointing down, what city are you watching this from? Comment below. Let people know they're not alone where you live. If this story moved you, shocked you, or opened your eyes, like this video so more people see it. Subscribe to the channel if you believe real stories matter more than comfort. And most importantly, share this video with someone who lives under an HOA. Because if telling this story protects even one child, then it was worth everything.